with that, it's 9 a.m., so let's get started. So for those who just joined or joining in, hi, I'm Corey Price. I'm the new host for Creative Mornings. It's really nice to see your faces and to see your names and to see your silly insecurities this morning. So if you're wondering why everybody has words next to their name, we're listing kind of like our name tags. We're listing what silly insecurities we have. Mine happens to be I burn just about half of everything I cook. So fun fact. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So bear with me for one moment. Can everybody see it? Oh, I haven't hit the share button. This is not, this is the first one. So here we go. Now we're in business. So let me move everybody's video over here. All right. So welcome. I'm really excited that we get to come back together and be, together in a virtual space and to be able to talk about something creative this morning. I don't know about you, but I've been kind of waiting for this moment in the last couple of months. So happy you all are here with us. So we've been using a lot of the features like the pin the video to your window feature. We're going to continue to kind of use some of those as we go through today and as we hear Irene's talk later on. So there's different emojis you can use. We're going to use the hand raising button. So in your participant view where you see the list of participants, there's a raise hand feature. And you can click on that and it'll raise your hand, and then we'll be able to see you raise your hand. And then you can click on it to lower your hand. And there's also some other things on there, like there's emojis where you can clap your hand or give like a thumbs up that you can use as well. So today, and it's also, oh, I am muted.
Oh, no,
I'm not. Oh, I'm good. Oh, okay. I saw the little, you are muted sign flash up. Cool. I am not muted. So today is Juneteenth Day. And there's been a lot of articles in the news, some stories on social media, all sorts of events that are popping up all over the country to celebrate. So if you're not familiar with this date, I kind of gave a little bit of the history there of what Juneteenth Day is. And it's really a day of celebration. Typically, there's cookouts, there's church services, there's a lot of festivals that go on for Juneteenth Day, all in celebration of when the last slaves in the US heard that they were free, which occurred over 2 years after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was carried out. So I've listed a couple ways that you can celebrate here. I believe we'll have some links going into the chat so that you can click on those so you can actually navigate to the event and save it on your browser for later. So the Jefferson School is going to have a celebration today on Facebook. That'll be at 6 p.m. There's also a day and a weekend of action going on across the nation called 619. And that's something that you can go and check out that website to see, how you can virtually celebrate, or if there are things going on in Richmond or things like that. The other thing is the bridge has been working nonstop on displaying art and photographs documenting, the current movement, the current moment that we are in right now. And that slideshow is available for viewing at Splendora downtown. So there's a lot of cool work that I've seen on social media, and that's also an option for you to go take a walk and view the work that local artists have been doing as we go through this current moment. So yeah, happy Juneteenth to all, and thanks for celebrating, with the Black community. This is a pretty cool moment to be in and an exciting moment to be in. All right, so I talked about the features, right? So we're gonna put those features to the test. So I've got a series of questions where participant involvement is encouraged. So let me get my participant screen up on my other screen so I can see everyone. All right, so raise your hand if you're calling in from Charlottesville. I think it's filling up my screen, so that's cool. We can see how many people are here from Charlottesville. Awesome. All right. Raise your hand if you are not calling in from Charlottesville. Quite a few. It would be cool to see where you're from if you want to post where you're from in the chat. Let me open my chat. We've got Vermont, Charlotte, Wyoming, very cool. Brooklyn, Nova, DC, awesome. Montreal, and Denver, very cool. It's really neat to have such a global audience in our town. So thanks for coming. Okay, raise your hand if this is your first Creative Mornings event. We usually do this in person. Looks like there's a few of you. Welcome, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us virtually. Very cool. All right, raise your hand if you're feeling grateful for someone or something. Awesome, me too. Raise your hand if you're feeling overwhelmed. Yep, me too, me too. Raise your hand if you believe we're all in this together. Super cool. Super cool. Well, thanks guys. Thanks for raising your virtual hand. So now we're going to take a group photo. So if you're okay with showing your video this morning, great. If not, also great. But we're going to pause and commemorate this first Charlottesville virtual Creative Mornings event. We're going to take a couple pictures. I'll kind of count us all off. So if you have a pet that you'd like in the photo, or a friend, or one of your children, or all of your children, or whatnot, your robot pet, bring them in. All right, I'm gonna stop the sharing for a second so we can go full screen on everyone's faces. And when it looks like we've got just about everyone ready, oh, so many babies and puppies and partners and friends. Oh, we've got a cat. All right. All right, is everybody ready who's taking photos? Okay, get ready. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're gonna take another one. Maybe change up the thing you're doing. I don't really have something to hold, so we're just gonna go copy again. Oh, we got puppies, I love it. Kermit the Frog. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. And one more for good measure. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Cool. All right. That was easy. All right. We are back to the screen share. So this morning's theme is insecure. And we're so excited to have Irene here to share some of her work with us and to speak on this topic. But first, I want to just give a little shout out to our sponsors. So these are global sponsors, MailChimp. If you're interested in using MailChimp, if you've got a small business, you're an artist, there's this new Courier Media service that you can sign up for. So there's a little bit of information there if you're interested. Also brought to you by WordPress. More WordPress. And Basecamp. Basecamp also has a promotion going on. So if that's something that if that's a service that you would like to try, maybe now's the time to do it. And we also want to thank our local sponsors. So that's Worth Higgins and Associates. It's Ting, the Fralin Museum of Art, Willow Tree, UVA Arts, The Bridge, and New City Arts. So thank you to our local sponsors. I know many of you are here representing your business or your initiative. So thank you again. And we're going to have a couple of quick announcements. We're going to start with the Fralin. So Lisa, if you would like to go ahead and share, I've got your slide up here if you wanted to share your announcements for us.
Okay, thank you, Corey. So real quick, I just wanted to let everyone know, if you didn't already know, we've been working really hard for the last 3 months on our virtual programming. We're calling it the Fralin from Home. Next Thursday, we're doing a partnership with the Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection, and it's the first in a monthly series called The Art in Life. And next Thursdays is going to talk about tattooing, which, and we've got 4 panelists that are going to be amazing. So definitely tune into that. We're having our second virtual wine tasting and art talk next Friday, the 26th, with Veritas Winery, and our director, Matthew McClendon, will talk about a couple of artworks while you enjoy the wine. And then our education team has been working tirelessly to create amazing online programming for all ages. And I know Emily Lazara, one of our fabulous educators, is on right now. And I'm going to just say you could go ahead and send a message to Emily right now if you have any questions. But to not take up any more time, I will put a link to our Fralin from Home page in the chat, and you can go there to get more information and to register for any of these virtual events. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. All right, next we've got The Bridge. So Alan's got a couple of announcements he'd like to make.
The only thing I really want to say today is that, you know, when the world changes is when artists go to work. And there are a lot of great arts organizations here in Charlottesville, including The Bridge and all the people that are associated with The Bridge, who are doing really meaningful things in this moment. I am not going to go through the massive list of all of the things that are happening in town and all of the things that The Bridge is helping to try to facilitate here in Charlottesville. But I will just go ahead and paste a link to our recent newsletter in the comment section here. And I would invite you all to check out what we've been up to and see if there's ways that you can get involved and see and hear from the voices of artists in our community who are doing meaningful things, and be a part of community in any way that you can, albeit virtually at times or social distancing at times. So thanks, everyone. Good morning.
Thanks, Alan. And next we've got Lindsay from New City Arts.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I changed my Insecurity to "Can you hear my dog snoring?" which you most certainly will as I'm talking, so forgive my bulldog. One thing I wanted to mention this morning is that we partnered with The Bridge back in March to start the Charlottesville Emergency Relief Fund for artists. And that is a relief fund that is specific for creative people in our community who have an active art practice, and you can apply for up to $300 of relief if you have lost any income as a result of the pandemic. So about 100 people, donors, have helped us raise about $45,000 at this point. And as of last week, I haven't updated this number for this week, $41,050 had been dispersed to 145 Charlottesville area artists. We are still taking applications for the funding, so if you are in need or if anyone you know is in need, please don't hesitate to apply. We're also still actively fundraising, so if you have some extra cash that you would like to pass along to an artist in your community, you can donate. All of the money that we're raising is going directly to the artists. Neither organization is keeping any admin, over any money for us. So I'm going to put a link in the chat so you can learn more about that. And yeah, that's all for me today.
Great. Thanks so much. All right, the moment we've been waiting for. Oh, wait, one more slide. Got you all excited for nothing. Still an exciting slide. This is a snapshot of how big and how global Creative Mornings is, especially for those who, this is your first Creative Mornings event. So 215 chapters across 67 countries. About 20,000 people come and learn something new and share ideas every month. There are 8,078 talks online and 9.1 million views of video. So it's pretty expansive, and our small town is a part of something global that's huge, which I always enjoy, feeling like the world is so big and so connected. All right. So we usually have someone read our manifesto in person. Is there any volunteer who'd like to raise their hand and read for us today? And Emma, you might have to find my person for me because I cannot see my participants anymore. But if anybody would like to read it, I'll have the words up on the screen for you to read for everyone.
Do we have any brave volunteers?
No hand raisers?
No? Oh, we do.
Awesome.
Yes. Okay. Please introduce yourself. Thank you for reading.
It wouldn't let me unmute, sorry. Good morning. My name is Boomy Collins, and this is my first meeting, and I will read the manifesto. Let's see. Everyone is creative. A creative life requires bravery and action, honesty and hard work. We are here to support you, celebrate with you, and encourage you to make the things you love. We believe in the power of community. We believe in giving a damn. We believe in face-to-face connections, in learnings from others, in jazz hands, virtual claps, and virtual snaps. We bring together people who are driven by passion and purpose, confident that they will inspire one another and inspire change in neighborhoods and cities around the world. Everyone is welcome.
Thank you so much for reading. And thanks for coming to your first Creative Mornings. We're so happy to have you.
Thanks.
Now the moment we've all been waiting for. All right, so Irene Mathieu is a pediatrician, writer, and author of 3 collections of poetry. Her most recent book, Grand Mirage, won Editor's Choice for the Gatewood Prize and runner-up for the Northwestern Cave Canon Book Prize. She is also the author of Reimagining, which won the Bob Kaufman Book Prize, and The Galaxy of Origins. A recipient of fellowships from Fulbright, Callaloo, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, Irene practices primary care pediatrics at the University of Virginia, where she leads workshops on poetry and medicine for physicians in training and serves as editor for Muzzle Magazine in the humanities section of the Journal of General Internal Medicine. So we're gonna go ahead and mute everyone before we begin the talk. If you have a question, use the raise your hand feature after when we do the Q&A session. And we'll also keep an eye on the chat window for you to if you would rather not speak. So with that, I'm going to welcome Irene. Welcome.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. This is really exciting. And I appreciate the invitation to share my work with you all this morning and to talk about insecurity. This is actually my first creative morning as well, because unfortunately in pre-pandemic times, I would always have to work on Friday mornings. And so I'm really excited to be here to do the first Zoom creative mornings for Charlottesville. So happy Juneteenth. I am planning today to share an excerpt of an essay in progress from some new creative nonfiction I've been working on, as well as a couple of poems. So I'll jump right in. My father is prone to obsession. For as long as I can remember, he's moved from thing to thing, latching on until he's an expert, and then laboriously sharing his newfound knowledge, solicited or not, with his family. I joke that research is his main love language. This obsessiveness is a desirable feature for a physician scientist, which he was until, disillusioned with academic medicine, he dropped the scientist part and resorted to practicing only. One of his obsessions that predates my birth is Western classical music. When my sister was 4 years old and I was 7, he took us up to the attic of our house at the time, which I avoided going into alone because I was scared of the dead wasps that littered the floor, to have a very serious conversation about starting piano lessons. Will you practice? My father wanted to know. Every day, he meant. Would I take it as seriously as he did? Bored and jumpy because of the wasp's desiccated bodies just a few feet away from us, I nodded solemnly, hoping it would speed up the conversation. Thus, we were introduced to the world of music my father so loves. While he himself did not learn to play piano until starting lessons a few years ago, my father supplemented our musical education by teaching us to recognize the different periods of European classical music and the major composers of each. He'd switch on the radio, and after a few measures, the quizzing would begin. Who is it? He'd ask. Mozart? Haydn? Early Beethoven? We'd blurt back. Whoever got it right had the pleasure of feeling brilliant for a few moments under the warmth of my father's praise. The reality of piano lessons for me, however, was mostly drudgery and avoidance. I was famous for having to be told many times in an afternoon to go practice, and each time would explain that I was reading something very important and would practice when I got to the end of the chapter. Invariably, I'd start the next chapter without anyone knowing so that I could honestly retort that I was in the middle of a chapter by the time my mother would yell again for me to practice. While I always had mixed feelings when it came to recitals, my younger sister thrived on the attention of a stage light. As a 3-year-old, she once forced her way on stage after my Catholic school-wide talent show, in which each class gave a collective performance, commandeered the microphone, and sang a rendition of our school's song in her signature, bizarrely deep toddler voice, much to the amusement of all present except for me. I was decidedly neutral about public performance and felt truly comfortable only when it involved telling some sort of story. In most piano recitals, we were required to perform our pieces by memory. My stage fright worsened the older I got. I became increasingly paralyzed by the thought of making a mistake, avoiding recitals until absolutely required to perform, and often playing with hesitation, full of fear about forgetting and losing track of the notes entirely. There were moments I enjoyed playing, usually when a piece's emotionality mirrored my teenage angst, but it was when I went off to governor's school, a statewide summer enrichment program between junior and senior years of high school, that I truly appreciated my musical training. I hadn't realized that I was homesick because the first few days of governor's school, which took place on a university campus in Richmond, Virginia, were full of such excitement, new friends, dorm life, compelling classes. But when I let myself into one of the practice rooms in the music hall and started to play the first few chords of the Brahms intermezzo I had been learning all year, I realized that I missed it badly. Specifically, I missed the space I didn't even know that I had been creating for myself, a space that opened up when I was practicing and nobody was listening to me. It was music without the performance, or a private performance, by and for me alone. My fears around performing by memory came to a head many years later when my partner, now spouse, purchased a couple of tickets to take me to a live taping of the Moth Radio Hour. For anyone who's unfamiliar, the idea in the Moth is that audience members tell their own stories. The best story then advances to higher levels of competition, and the winners from various Moth performances around the country eventually become part of a radio show and the podcast by the same name. That night's theme was roots, broadly interpreted, and took place at one of the Smithsonian buildings on the National Mall. On the drive down from Philadelphia, where I was living at the time, to Washington, D.C., I'd been practicing my story about the origins and importance of gumbo in my family, repeatedly in the car. I knew where my jokes were and when the story would turn, the way I would modulate my voice to convey the emotion I felt. I was excited. You don't actually have to perform, my partner had reminded me that morning. We could just, watch the show. It was unthinkable to me, however, that I would pass up an opportunity to tell a story. I didn't realize how nervous I would feel until I saw the crowd of 200-some people assembled. My stomach, into which I had put no food or water for at least 8 hours, dropped precipitously when, to my shock and terror, my name was called second. With legs wobbling and heart pounding so hard that my chest hurt, I made my way to the stage. The lights were bright and far hotter than I had anticipated. I was conscious that I was sweating profusely and there was a searing pain in my temple to accompany the squeezing in the middle of my chest. I started telling my story, willing myself to keep standing, to keep breathing. Somewhere around a minute and a half, I faltered, just as I feared I would do on the piano bench during all those childhood recitals. No problem, I remember thinking. I'll just start that sentence over again. Only I didn't. When I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by people, including my partner. Their faces were worried, but I was still standing before the crowd. They were urging me to get off the stage, and I was frustrated. I couldn't understand why they were interrupting my story. Once they cajoled me backstage, I was hastily sat in a chair, and a moth staff member started asking me if I had any medical conditions. No, I said, bewildered. Do you know what just happened? They asked. I did not. Apparently, I had not gone back to the beginning of that sentence where I stumbled. Instead, I had begun babbling incoherently while swaying and sweating on stage, hyperventilating. Somehow, I managed not to fall, but I was completely unconscious of what I was doing. I had blacked out, so to speak, while standing, from sheer panic, possibly exacerbated by my empty stomach and dehydration. The staff insisted on calling an ambulance, whose crew took my vital signs and blood sugar, pronounced them normal, and then tried to convince me to come with them to the hospital. No, I said, I'm a doctor, I'm fine. Doctors are notorious for being terrible patients. I actually finished my story after the intermission, to much pity applause, and got a box of animal crackers for my troubles. Later, I thought about why I had been so frightened as to black out. It wasn't the public speaking that had gotten to me, I realized. It was the hole in my performance. The forgetting was what tipped me over from panic into some sort of partial consciousness. It was as if I had dropped the thread of what I was saying, the thread of who I was in that moment, and wandered into a nonsensical forest, no breadcrumbs to guide my way back. I'm convinced that part of my fascination with performance, when and how and why we do it, arises from the fact that my parents made the then radical decision to raise us without a television in our home. As a result, for many years, I felt, and sometimes still feel, like an outsider when it comes to social norms and popular culture. My parents' decision was intended to reduce brainwashing in terms of our ideas about others and about ourselves, and our exposure to relentless advertising. This was in the 1990s, before the days of ubiquitous screens, when TV was basically the only thing you could spend hours passively binging. They didn't want us to learn stereotypes, my parents explained later, in addition to maximizing our imaginations and minimizing any penchant for couch potato-dom that we might have. As a result, we were certainly active and imaginative children, bookworms who spent as much time reading as we did traipsing through the woods behind our suburban Virginia home, inventing religions, battling each other in an elaborate art-like form of stick fighting we'd created in a game we called Catan, long before there was a commercial Catan game, and doing who knows what other marginally dangerous activities. But the first goal, which at its core was really about a dream of authenticity, had more mixed results. My parents didn't want us to be hindered or limited by stereotypes we might learn about race and gender. They wanted us to just be ourselves. The thing is, no one is just themselves. We learned the stereotypes anyway, of course, just later than our peers did. I learned a lot of things later, like the flirtatious dance that starts between boys and girls in middle school. I also went to a private all-girls middle school. I was so eager to catch up in high school that I performed it all wrong. I went up to boys and told them I liked them. I wrote love letters and stuffed them into guys' lockers. I asked boys to dance at homecoming and prom and was turned down. No one had explained how the game worked, and I was so focused on catching up. Babies learn social interactions from watching the people around them and observing what reactions their behavior elicits in others. This is why we tell the exasperated parents of toddlers to use positive reinforcement for desirable behavior and to redirect or ignore undesirable behavior. This is simple conditioning. Young children aren't conscious that this is what we are doing when we praise or ignore them, but frankly, most of us don't even notice how we are being conditioned and reconditioned and thus recalibrating our behavior all the time. In this sense, all behavior is performance. As we learn our classed, gendered, raced, etc. identities, we learn and relearn the behaviors associated with those identities in order to solidify our position as members of these groups. It's ironic that despite the normalcy of this human tendency, we have come to praise and aspire to that which we perceive to be authentic. But there might only be the illusion of authenticity, which is simply a measure of how convincing our performances are. Most professions that involve interactions with other humans require a significant amount of acting, learned behaviors that constitute the professional identity of a doctor, mechanic, lawyer, teacher, salesperson, etc. Always sit down, I tell the doctors in training that I teach. Studies have shown that patients whose doctors don't sit when they come into the room perceive the doctor to have spent less time than she did when compared with the doctor who sat. The physicians we typically consider good dress the part, sit with us, face us at eye level, listen, validate our concerns, and communicate well. These are skills that physicians must learn and practice. Medical schools are increasingly using standardized patients, paid actors, in clinical simulations. In these simulations, an actor performs being a patient in order to allow medical students to practice performing their role as a doctor. This isn't bad or wrong, but we shy away from admitting it to those outside of our profession for fear we may be seen as callous and calculating rather than compassionate. Learning how to relate to patients, how to be a good doctor, is part of medical education even if it isn't always explicitly stated. Towards the end of medical school, I developed a wrenching but blessedly brief anxiety about the two letters that would soon sit behind my name, MD. I knew that imposter syndrome affects women more than men, especially in STEM fields. And I had observed that my male counterparts, for all their bravado and quickness to answer questions from supervising physicians, were not correct more often than I was. I just liked to be certain, so I held my tongue, weighing a possible answer for too long in my mind, while another student jumped in to say it instead. But I also was humbled by how much we don't know. I mean myself in particular, but also human beings, my fellow physicians, and the scientists on whose knowledge we rely to advance Western biomedicine. What lay in the voids where our knowledge dropped off? Were there other kinds of knowledge we could access to fill the gaps? How could I balance performing the competence everyone wants their doctor to exude, while also remaining honest and open to both myself and my patients about the limits of our knowledge? It may seem cynical to suggest that all of us are always performing because we are taught that performance, or acting, is different from simply being, and therefore is inauthentic. But we are always learning to be something, someone, to everyone else. To our children, we are mothers and fathers. To our partners, we are lovers. To our siblings, we are siblings. To our friends, friends. Even in our most intimate relationships, we are learning and hopefully improving our performance of these roles for one another. By being conscious of who we are to others and what we need from these relationships, perhaps we can be even better in our roles as father, sister, partner, friend. Some people are naturally incredible friends or outstanding mothers. Others have to work at the skills that make people good at these roles, providing loving guidance as a parent or listening non-judgmentally as a friend. There is nothing wrong with practicing what we want to develop, with the knowledge that we will never be perfect. If imposter syndrome is an insecurity around one's ability to perform well, I'm curious about the space between not knowing and knowing how to be. In that space is the option to be or do differently, unexpectedly. If we can put aside fear and shame long enough to look at this space with curiosity, we might surprise ourselves. I found that one path to creativity then is to deliberately disrupt social expectations, or to find the potential energy in subverted expectations, even when you didn't intend to subvert them. It's the possibility unleashed when you liberate yourself from preconceived expectations and try alternatives. I explore this in a recent poem, which I'll read to you now. The Forest Fire of Family Trees. The problem is, we don't know that many ways of doing things. For instance, neither of us can fry an egg without public radio chattering in our ears. And there are worse blueprints for a home, like what my grandfather taught my uncle. We think we know people until we see the way they eat a banana, totally unlike how we peel and devour the fruit. Only instead of eating a banana, it's something way bigger, like loving another person. As the snowflakes get thicker, I hear myself say exactly what my mother would say when faced with this same situation, and I say it in her voice. It's not that I'm ashamed to share all my DNA and most of my life with these people. It's just that I worry. It's not easy to recognize the odor of toxins you release day after day, which, when rearranged, spells door. You cross the threshold and think it's just the cologne of your world, not the smoke in your blood, not grass burning from the little fires ignited by your feet. Another path to creativity is to focus on the abyss where our knowledge drops off. What happens when the answer is, I don't know? Could asking the questions differently yield answers blooming out of the void? In my most recent book of poetry, I asked what would happen if I removed the mask of my identities as our family member, partner, writer, physician, an upper middle class descendant of New Orleans free people of color, a US American Black person, and a woman. What if I stopped playing my part and looked at it under the microscope, the way I tried so desperately, and failed, to understand the dynamics of high school romance? What if I asked why and how I'd even inherited such a part? This is what I call radical curiosity. Curiosity that keeps asking until I've reached the root of my question. Here's an example of the result. This poem is called Past Life, and it has an epigraph from the Harlem Renaissance poet, also from New Orleans, named Alice Moore Dunbar Nelson. She said, "There are moments when the consciousness of a former life comes sharply upon us." Past life. Once I was the last day of July, brilliant as a shell at the center of a white flame. I was the thunder-fisted sky palming a wooden table in heaven until each small creature turned its questioning pulse up, nose first. And I was a panicked dove, wings inverting as she flew backward through my storming chest. In my past life, I was quicksand, insatiable, and I was solid, a mothering ground. I held your and your footprints. I was swamp grass hiding the bodies of ducks and the bullet planted in their bellies and young bloom of blood. I was nest, I was egg, I was gill, I was breath. In my past life, stalagmites rose from my skin. My skull was geode. I split open and sparkled. The sun washed their face with my light, gravity more suggestion to me than law. It's no wonder that this human life feels small running down my spine. Every night I dream of the things I have been, and every day I wake up to the silver wafer of grief resting faintly on my tongue. It's been suggested that artists and writers have a critical role in reimagining our society so that we can collectively work toward a more just and peaceful version of ourselves. How do we do that? I think we can approach this work of reimagining by disrupting the automaticity of our performances, the roles we each play, and by playing in the field of our ignorance. It's a risky prospect, I know, but what we don't know both threatens to engulf us with insecurity and offers possibility. Do I know enough? Am I enough? That the answers to both questions are slippery and forever just out of our grasp is also the key to creating ourselves and our society anew. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm giving a quiet applause. I know so many others are too. So are there any questions? You can feel free to type them into the chat and I'll ask, or raise your hand and we can unmute you. Sonia. All right, I just unmuted you.
Hi, I'm Sonia. This is also my first Creative Morning, so I think quite a few of us have had firsts here. I've always had class on Fridays. So you were talking a bit about the performative aspect of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think that your previous performance experience, like with public speaking or with music, have either like helped or hindered you in recognizing that?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps. I do draw on some of the experience I've had with music and with reading and speaking publicly in my role as a physician. But I also think that learning how to be a physician and that kind of performance is a separate skill set. And it's not that it's inauthentic, right? If somebody tells you they're in pain, you feel badly, you feel compassion for them, but not everyone, people can't read your mind. So it's about conveying what you feel in a way that's comfortable to the patient, but also appropriate and therapeutic and different than how you would react if a friend told you I feel bad or your mom told you that she felt bad. So I do think it's a unique skill set, but there's definitely some overlap. And I think that my background as a poet and as a musician have made me more conscious of the performance, maybe in a way that isn't as intuitive for some of my colleagues. But I think it is something that we learn very specifically and deliberately in medical school. So even for folks who don't have a background in performance, you get introduced to it, and it's something that you have to practice as part of your medical training.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I ask specifically because I'm a pre-med double majoring in biology and poetry, so.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Sounds awesome. Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for that question. We've got one in the chat from Kelly. Can you talk about your writing process? How often and any rituals you have to cultivate your writing?
My writing process is kind of all over the place. And I say that because my schedule and my life involve many different moving pieces. And so my availability to write is really variable depending on the day. So I guess the rituals would be mostly around creating the spaces and the conditions that are conducive to my creativity. And so I know that I think best and my mind is kind of most awake and alert at night between like 9 p.m. and midnight or so. So that's the time, if I don't have to get up super early, I try to reserve that time to read and then also to write and brainstorm and journal. And that's my most productive and creative space. But obviously sometimes there are days I have to get up earlier or I have other things going on that I need to spend that time doing something else. And so I kind of miss that window. But if I'm able to, I try to reserve that window for myself. And as a writer, I think that one of the most important things that I do on almost a daily basis is read. Even if I'm not writing, I'm reading something every day. And I try to read multiple genres. I love fiction, but also poetry and nonfiction. So I usually have at least one book in each genre going. And so constantly kind of keeping my mind engaged through reading is the most consistent and probably the most important part of my creative process.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Smith has a question, so I'll unmute you.
Hi, yeah. So as you said, and we witnessed, your poetry is obviously very personal. A lot of, lifting up that mask that you said and going it. Do you try to find a balance between being too raw and personal and being a little bit removed from it, or do you feel like you just jump right in, or does it just depend on what you're attacking at the time?
Yeah, I would say it kind of depends. I do shy away from some things that are very specific, more so to protect other people in my life that I may be writing about directly or indirectly. So I try to respect the privacy of my family members. And if I am going to write about something very specific and personal, I usually will show it to them so they have a heads up. Or if I'm going to publish it or share it, I'll ask their permission. But I also know that my personality is such that I don't really mind sharing personal things. And I think that the benefits of sharing that outweigh any discomfort I might feel. And I feel very comfortable with that. And it's definitely taken me years to get to that point, and it's a process. But I find kind of a strength in that vulnerability or find something empowering about it. And I know that not everyone has that personality. And I have family members who would never talk about some of the things I talk about in my poems. But I also feel like if I have that comfort with it, then it's kind of my duty as an artist to put that out there and to put those things on the line, because there are a lot of topics that we don't talk about in society because it's considered impolite or we don't want to make other people uncomfortable. So I do feel like if I am okay with doing that, then it's part of my job as an artist is to do that and to make myself vulnerable for the process, for the purpose of creating a conversation with other people.
All right. So we'll take one more question from the participant window, and then I've got 2 in the chat for you. So we'll start with Federico. Okay, just unmuted you.
Can you hear? Hi, this is Karina. Sorry, I'm with my question is about, you talk about imposter syndrome, and specifically, I just wanted to know what are like some tools or what are the ways that you've been able to like combat imposter syndrome, especially as a woman of color, like on a daily basis. So yeah, just wanted to hear more about that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but for me personally, something that's been helpful is noticing what my peers are doing. So when I would feel like, gosh, in medical school, for example, I don't know the answers, I'm not answering as quickly as other people, I would start paying more attention to what my peers would say. And then I would notice, oh, these guys that raise their hand, half the time they're wrong too, but they just keep it moving. They don't feel bad about themselves and no one cares. The attending doctor just tells them the correct answer, everyone learns and they move on. And so that kind of gave me more confidence to realize I need to trust myself more, because a lot of times my discomfort with speaking up or doing something is not because I don't know the answer, I don't know what to do. It's because I just don't fully trust myself. And that took many years, I mean, starting even before my medical training, to learn to combat. But I do think that part of it is being aware of how much kind of the fake it till you make it thing, like how much of confidence has to do with creating a sense of confidence and acting confident, even if you don't feel confident. And if it's something like being a physician, obviously you have to know that you also have the skills and the knowledge to do your job well. But one thing I would take comfort in is, okay, I went to medical school for 4 years, I passed all my classes, I passed the boards, like I know my stuff. I have patients who have told me they like what I'm doing. So I need to just have faith in that knowledge and trust that that information is important information for me to feel confident about myself and move forward with that. And it is, it's definitely a moving target and something that I still struggle with a little bit, but I think it just took years of me kind of paying close attention to what other people were doing, but also just having faith in the process that I put myself through of going through medical school and residency training and those things.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the last 2 from the chat, I'm going to combine a couple that folks have asked. So this first one is, so how do you find your patients or your colleagues informing, inspiring your poetry or your nonfiction writing, as well as, how do you navigate, your creativity as a physician?
Mm-hmm. I find that my patients and colleagues and my job in general inspire my writing sort of indirectly. So I'm really interested in, you probably got the sense of this from the poems I read, but I'm really interested in the upstream social factors that shape people's lives long before they come into my care. So I'm less interested in telling the story of individual patients and more interested in kind of the big picture histories of why things are the way they are. And part of it is that I think that sometimes medical poetry can very easily become sort of overly saccharine and emotional and sentimental, because medicine is a very, in some ways, it's a very emotional job. You're seeing people at their most vulnerable. You're having them share, deep secrets or pain with you. And so part of me feels like it's hard to write a good poem using those things, but I also want to respect the confidentiality of my patients. And even if I make a poem completely, anonymous, I still feel like there are very few instances where it's my right to write about that story, or it's my job to tell that person's story. So the few times that I've actually written directly about my job are more when I'm writing about my experience within that interaction or within that moment. So I don't write too much specifically about my clinical work, but I'm more interested in the big picture issues in our society that sort of lead people into my care, if that makes sense. And was there a second part of the question I missed?
It was, I think you kind of answered it. Like, how is creativity, how are you navigating that as a physician?
Yeah, I tend to keep them somewhat, well, until recently I kept them somewhat separate. I had a lot of really great writer friends when I was doing my residency in Philadelphia, and at first when I would meet people in Philly, they had no idea I was a physician. They would be totally shocked because they just knew me as a poet, and vice versa. So a lot of my colleagues were like really surprised when I told them, oh, I have to go to a poetry reading after work. And they were like, what? So I think now I've started to integrate them because I'm actually really interested in the ways that literature, specifically poetry, but literature in general, can teach us in particular about health inequity and social disparities. And so there's a field of narrative medicine, which is kind of looking at poetry and narrative practices and reflective writing as a way for physicians to sort of process their emotions and understand their patients' emotions and experiences. And so I'm interested in how narrative medicine can also open up a space for a different type of medical education around disparities and the societal factors that create different outcomes for different patients. And that's something I think people haven't really been talking about too much in medicine. So they're starting to converge for me in the educational space.
Awesome. Thank you. Last one. What are you reading now?
Yeah, so from a poetry standpoint, I am reading Paige Lewis's debut, which is called Space Struck. From a nonfiction standpoint, I'm actually reading a very relevant book to this time period called Bad Advice by Paul Offit, who's an expert on vaccines. And it's all about how, it's really interesting. It's about how the media and kind of celebrity culture has taken over the message of scientists from scientists. And so how we got like anti-vaxxer movements and pseudoscience and hoax cures, which is very relevant for this time of the pandemic. And he's a national expert in vaccines, but he also has done a lot of media appearances around vaccine safety and leads, he invented a vaccine actually. He's one of the national experts. So it's really interesting to read his perspective as a person who knows the science and has also been in the media and been in that translational space and some of his lessons learned. And then from a fiction standpoint, I just started Britt Bennett's new book, The Vanishing Half, which is fantastic and very much deserves its #1 place on the New York Times fiction bestseller list at the moment. So I'm loving that book. And then I'm also reading some short stories by Anton Chekhov, just sort of here and there. I've been picking up this book and reading a few at a time, and they're absolutely delightful and hilarious. And I love that Chekhov is also a physician. So that's a cool little tidbit that I had forgotten.
I'm going to have to check out most of those books. So thanks for sharing what you're reading. Thank you for sharing with us today with your new work and in your poems. And then thank you to everybody who's joined our first virtual Creative Mornings Charlottesville event, my first Creative Mornings event as a host. It's been really great to see everybody's faces and to hear your questions and to see your pets and your families, what you're eating for breakfast. This has just really been a joyous way to start off my Friday, and I just want to thank you all for that, as well as thank the team behind the scenes. So that's Emma Terry, Alan Gafinsky, Jeremy Stern, and Lindsay Leahy. So thank you all for your help, for helping me get started. And then, of course, thank you, Irene. This was brilliant.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here, and thanks for inviting me. This is really fun, and it's really nice to see so many lovely faces on Zoom today. Many people I haven't seen in person in a while, so being here.
Excellent.
I just put the name of the books in the chat per request. So.
Oh, perfect. I'll leave the screen open a little bit so that she can do that. And then, have a good Friday. Have a good weekend. Happy Juneteenth Day. Enjoy your day. We'll see you soon.